for being here. We are starting slightly late, but I think it's fine. Welcome everyone to the second day of the Nordic Ukrainian Democracy Summit 2026 here in Copenhagen. It's a privilege to gather here in the Danish Parliament, the setting that reflects the importance of the dialogue, democratic values and international partnership. So the main topic of our summit is a durable peace through democratic resilience, the Nordic Ukrainian partnership at scale. The program will consist of a keynote speech and 3 excellent panel discussions, followed by some reflections from the organizers of the event. After the first panel, there will be a short break for coffee, and it will be served in the hall there to the right from myself. At around noon, we will have a good lunch and a group picture. The lunch will be served again in that hall. And then after the third panel, we will have closing remarks from co-organizers. And just before leaving, we will have a break for coffee and final opportunity for networking. Okay, so now I would like to welcome here at the stage our host here in the Parliament, Ms. Anna Valentina Bertelsen, Member of Parliament from the SF Socialist People's Party. Warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the Danish Parliament. My name is Anna Valentina. I am a member of Parliament for SF in Danish, or the Green Left Party in English. I work with defense policy, and I have seen a number of you before. Hopefully, we won't be seeing each other for that many years to come in this way. On February 24th, in 2022, I woke in the early hours of the morning because something didn't feel right. For some weeks, maybe even months, the unknown, and yet I could not believe my eyes when I turned on the news. I think a number of you felt that way. And now we are coming into the 5th year of this war. I think the media and part of the public opinion has lost interest in the Ukrainian war. And this is what we see. Wars, they come and they go in the media overview. Right now, someone else is taking up the headlines. But we need to keep the focus. And that's what you do in your everyday work. Last year, on February 24th, in the early hours of the morning, I was on the train, going from Poland into Ukraine with the Danish defense minister. And I had my daughter in my belly. I remember thinking, what a life to grow up in a country at war. And I know some of you, humanitarian workers, volunteers, journalists, have been in Ukraine a number of times. You have families, you have friends, and to do the work that you do for the Ukrainians, sometimes you even bring them. The sacrifice that Ukrainians are bringing and that you are bringing to make sure that you can support in your way is tremendous. And I salute you for this, because without you, we would not have the strong support for the Ukrainian cause. We need you to continue, and we will do so in the Danish Parliament as well. Now, Denmark is an old democracy, and today is about democratic solutions, partially. Denmark is a slow democracy right now. We are still lacking a government, but hopefully we will get one soon, so that the donations and the support for Ukraine can continue. But for now, we will have to make do with what you have to say today. And I'm looking forward to hearing the panel discussions, your ideas, your opinions. And for that, I thank you for wanting to show up today. I hope you will have a great conference, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Just to quickly mention, we would like to thank Ms. Anna Valentin with the token of appreciation and present you with the book, The Flood, which is going to be very relevant to the themes of this event today, discussing justice and accountability of Russian crimes. Okay, just before moving on, I would like to very briefly go back to this slide and say that this event is co-organized by 5 organizations this year from different countries from Nordics. And these are Nordic Ukraine Forum from Stockholm, Sweden, Ukrainian Dialogues from Copenhagen, Denmark, Association of Ukrainians in Denmark, from Copenhagen obviously, Association of Ukrainians in Finland from Helsinki, and Ukrainian Association in Norway from Oslo. And this event would not have been possible without support from our sponsors and partners. So our sponsors are Nordic Council of Ministries, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Knut Hörver's Fund, and the City of Copenhagen. And also we are collaborating with Colo Nordic and Rasmus Grue. I would like to give a hand of applause for this. Yes, now I would like to take this opportunity and talk a little bit about the summit itself and the concept behind it. So firstly, my name is Marc. I am a project manager for this event, and I represent the organization Nordic Ukraine Forum, which is situated in Stockholm in Sweden. It's a Ukrainian advocacy civil society organization. We came up with this concept in 2023 when we invited our peer organizations from the Nordics to just meet up and get to know each other, maybe share some insights and the views on advocacy. But over the years it has grown into I could say, proper platform for civil society actors. And it equips different civil society organizations working with Ukraine in the Nordics and Baltics with tools and certain advocacy messaging strategies that help us stay engaged and support the just peace in Ukraine. So here are some pictures. This is actually the 4th instance of this summit held here in Copenhagen. Previously we had similar events in Stockholm 2023 and then in Helsinki and Oslo. It has grown significantly. You can see the graph here. So we started with 13 civil society organizations and 26 participants, and now we have grown to almost 50 with more than 100 people attending the summit this year. So one can say that these numbers are maybe relatively modest, because I know that civil society is very important in Nordics, and I even heard that when there are 2 days, there are 3 associations and a working group. But for Ukrainians, it's we are very happy to see this growth, and we hope that this annual event will transform into a self-sustained platform for city collaboration between Ukraine, Nordics and Baltics. So I thank you all for coming, and grateful for all your contribution that you are doing for the Ukraine cause. And I hope that you will find this program inspiring and useful. With this, I would like to invite on the stage one of the organizers of this summit, Ms. Lyudmila Waller, representing the Ukrainian Dialogues from Copenhagen, a civil society organization working with advocacy for Ukraine. Please, Lyudmila.
Dear all, this year, Nordic Ukraine Advocacy Summit brings together more than 150 participants, because there are so many of those who couldn't make it here because our capacity is so limited. They were across of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Ukraine. Among us are civil society organizations, researchers, journalists, policymakers, experts, volunteers, and community leaders. And this diversity is not accidental. It reflects exactly what the summit is meant to be. Thank you to each of you for being here today, and I will start from our audience. As the majority of you are volunteers and activists, dedicating your time and lives to something you truly believe in. Then I will say thank you to our speakers for their expertise and for choosing to join us and share their professional vision with civil society representatives and volunteers, as we are, and also the host and the Danish Parliament for showing this incredible recognition of your work and democratic commitment you do. We are here today because freedom and peace are never defended by weapons alone, but by people, by volunteers and journalists, by human rights defenders and local organizations, by analysts and teachers, by soldiers, and by communities that continue functioning even under enormous pressure. Hosting NAUS 2026 in Copenhagen, we as an organization tried to show and highlight how many people took the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the war they started as a personal threat. Behind your efforts, your ideas and your actions are simple human virtues we must cherish. In Ukraine we often say, to be informed is to be prepared, and to be prepared is to be protected. That is why it was also so important for us to secure leading experts in their fields. And today you will hear from some of the best. Engage with their ideas and expertise. We hope their work and their discussion will help you shape the priorities and directions for your work. They will speak about justice, not because justice is easy, but because it is difficult, and therefore that is exactly why we must do it. Because it forces us to confront realities that people naturally want to avoid. Occupation, deportation, torture, environmental destruction, stolen children, destroyed cities, and lives reduced to statistics, often only because of vanity. At the same time, we know that discussions about justice are increasingly challenged, but talking about it today will only help protect human dignity globally, develop international law, and remind us that occupation is not about territories, it is about people, about memories and culture, about nature, and is not disposable or belongs to the stronger. We will hear about Nordic defense against anti-democratic threats, how to be less vulnerable in the informational overflow. And what is very important, we will hear what else can be done to systematize our common work and make it more sustainable and efficient across borders. I also want to acknowledge our sponsors and partners, but not just to thank them, but underline why this cooperation matters. Volunteers, initiatives, and civil society organizations cannot sustain a high-quality work on dedication alone. We need institutional and financial support, your expertise, just as institutions need the knowledge, network, trust, and commitment that civil society brings. That is why recognition and support from institutions and authorities are not just important, but necessary. This is how we start a dialogue for action. And I plan here to say thank you all for supporting Ukraine. But I changed my mind. And I want to say that I believe and I know you support something bigger than Ukraine. And maybe like me, you are here because you also know that winning the war in Ukraine will help us stop also other wars, make humanity better, improve international law, make justice more real, and protect freedom better than we have done before. I encourage you all for the very fruitful discussions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ludmila. It's only a few days ago, on May 8th, that Europe commemorated the end of World War II. And while Europe marks this day in remembrance, we know that Russia uses this as a celebration. And this contrast is very relevant to many themes that will be brought up today. So with this in mind, the head of the Center of Civil Liberties and Nobel Peace Prize laureate 2022, Alexandra Matvichuk, has prepared a special message for you all. And we will watch it now on the screen. If we could please put that video.
When you know the history, it's impossible to idealize it. The 20th centuries brought 2 world wars, horrible colonial wars, a million of deaths, and total dehumanization of humankind. The responsibility for what has been perpetrated was codified in the slogan, "Never Again." But while for the Western societies, the end of the Second World War marked a victory of good over the evil, for Central and Eastern Europe it was just victory of one evil over another. When Nazi war criminals were tried in the Nuremberg trials, the Soviet Gulag was never condemned and punished. And that is why, while the whole world commemorates those who died in the Second World War with the slogan, "Never Again," Russia celebrates this day with a slogan we can repeat. All this hell which we face in Ukraine is a result of total impunity that Russia enjoyed for decades, committing horrible crimes in Chechnya, Moldova, Georgia, Mali, Libya, Syria, other countries of the world. They have never been punished. They believe they can do whatever they want. We must break the circle of impunity. Justice is precondition to sustainable peace in our region, where Russia, for decades, uses the war as a tool how to achieve its geopolitical interests, and for decades uses war crimes as the methods how to win the war. And it's not just Ukrainian responsibility. The result of Russian war of aggression against Ukraine will define our common future. Because with this war, Russia attempts to convince the entire world that a country with a strong military potential and nuclear weapon can invade another countries, kill people there, erode their identity, and stop their children. So if Russia remains unpunished, such actions in future will be recognized as acceptable. And this is not the future which we want for ourselves and for our own children. That is why we must try hard to change it for better.
These were important points for us to digest. Indeed, justice is a foundation for durable peace. So let us discuss this with experts from the first panel of the day. It is entitled Ensuring Just Peace, Addressing Russia's War Crimes in the Temporarily Occupied Territories and the International Response. The panel will be moderated by Professor Marlene, Director of the Center for European Politics at the University of Copenhagen. Professor Wien combines academic expertise with direct experience from European policy making. Just before asking Professor Wien to the stage, I would like to say that there will be a Q&A session at the end of this panel discussion. And for that, you please hold your hand up and our volunteers will bring the mics to you. So, Professor Wien, the floor is yours.
absolutely distinguished panel today. I think we will have everyone up here. I will introduce the panel, but let me just start by saying a few words about why this panel is so incredibly important. Because justice needs to be done, and it needs to be done while the war is still going on. I think that is a common denominator of what we are discussing here this morning, that justice cannot wait. I know that justice is an abstract principle and a little bit difficult to grasp as such. It needs to be founded and discussed in its empirical reality. But it's also a foundation for modern democracies and a requirement for sustainable peace. So Russia's war against Ukraine, unprovoked war of aggression, has brought widespread destruction to enormous parts of Ukraine. We see it every day, every morning we wake up. To infrastructure, human lives, abduction of children, Ukrainian prisoners of war, and civilians are hit and hurt every single day. Very often, this happens, even though things are filmed by drones. It doesn't seem to scare off the Russians that documentation is, to some extent at least, out there. I'm incredibly happy and pleased to be able to turn to some of the most distinguished scholars in this field and who can help us understand what is at stake here. How do we get documentation even at a more substantial level for the atrocities that have been made and are made currently in Ukraine? We need to talk about this. We need to do everything we can to get empirical data, and we also need to discuss this as something that has to be addressed and taken seriously, not just after the war, but as I said in my initial comments, even now when the war is still going on for a fifth year that we just entered. I would like to start by introducing the panel and give the word first to Thordis Kolbrun, yes, who is Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe on the situation of the Ukrainian children. And I would like to start out to ask you to give some comments on the work you are doing, but before that allow me just to introduce the rest of the panel as well. Down there we have Olha, Skrypnyk, who is head of the Crimean Human Rights Group, and has been documenting repression in the occupied part of the Crimean, and we look very much forward to hearing more about what you can report from that area of Ukraine. Then we have Rasmus Grue Christensen, who is CEO at Dignity and Chair of the Danish Human Rights Council, and leading a lot of work on documentation of torture and war crimes in Ukraine. And I know you have a very interesting report that you would like to talk about today. Then we have Marc, good colleague of mine, Associate Professor of International Law and National Security at the University of Copenhagen, who will tell us a little bit more generally about why we need to take the investigation of war crimes and accountability in war seriously, even before the war ends. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming. And could I please ask you, Thordis, to start and tell us a little bit about your work on the Ukrainian children and what you're doing in the Council of Europe as a special envoy there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. It is a privilege to address you here today at the Nordic Ukraine Advocacy Summit. This setting is particularly meaningful. It brings together policymakers, civil society and experts and reflects the Nordic countries' steadfast and principled support for Ukraine. And I agree, it's not only about Ukraine, it's about the rule of law and what is right and fair in this world. And at the time when the international community is confronted with a multitude of crises on many fronts, the work of this summit is essential to sustain momentum and ensure that Ukraine remains high on the international agenda. In this regard, it is also symbolic that following this plenary, I will travel to Brussels to participate in the high-level meeting of the International Coalition of the Return of Ukrainian Children, which underlines the importance of linking advocacy and political engagement with coordinated international action and concrete results. We are united by a clear purpose to uphold justice and accountability and to protect those most impacted by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, above all, its children. Children are among the most vulnerable victims of this war. Their rights to family life, identity, safety, and education have been profoundly affected in many negative and long-lasting ways. For many, childhood itself has been disrupted or taken away. The unlawful deportation and transfer of Ukrainian children, their separation from their families, and the risk to their identity remain among the most serious concerns. The unlawful deportation and forced transfer of Ukrainian children remains one of the gravest humanitarian consequences of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. At the same time, the situation of children living in the temporary occupied territories continues to require urgent international attention, and I think it needs more attention than it already has. These realities underline both the scale and the urgency of this challenge and the importance of sustained international engagement and coordination. Ukraine, together with its partners, continues daily efforts to locate, return and support every child. Important progress has been already achieved through the Bring Kids Back UA initiative, thanks to the combined efforts of authorities, civil society, law enforcement and volunteers. And as I'm pretty sure you all know, the NGOs inside Ukraine do the vast majority of that work, and it really reflects and shows the importance of that. However, these efforts continue to face serious obstacles. Children's whereabouts are concealed, personal data altered, and access for international organizations restricted. Yet, there can be no just and lasting peace without the return of Ukrainian children. So in line with my mandate as Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, my role is to ensure that the rights of Ukrainian children remain at the center of both national and international responses and are fully reflected in accountability efforts. This includes political and diplomatic efforts to support the safe, verified and rights-based return of Ukrainian children. It also involves strengthening international coordination with partners such as the United Nations, the OSCE, the European Union and others to ensure that our collective response is coherent, complementary and effective. The Council of Europe has a distinct role in this context. It provides a legal and institutional framework grounded in the European Convention on Human Rights and other key standards, including those on child protection and child-friendly justice. Our contribution is to ensure that accountability is firmly anchored in human rights and the rule of law. The European Court of Human Rights plays a central role in this architecture. Through its judgment, it establishes responsibility, clarifies legal obligations, and provides a basis for justice and redress. Its findings contribute to ensuring that violations are recognized and addressed in line with international standards. Indeed, the Council of Europe is actively contributing to the emerging accountability architecture in support of Ukraine. The Register of Damage for Ukraine is a key instrument in documenting harm, including in relation to children, and will support future compensation mechanisms. Ongoing work towards the Special Tribunal further reflects the shared determination to ensure accountability for the most serious violations. Accountability must, of course, also translate into concrete action for children. This includes ensuring their safe return, as well as their rehabilitation and reintegration. Through its action plan for Ukraine, and notably by the work of the consultation group on the children of Ukraine, the Council of Europe supports Ukraine in strengthening child protection system, promoting child-friendly justice, and providing trauma-informed support. And here I also have to say that the work inside Ukraine on better care and all the children's rights, and both with regards to the children that are brought back, but also in general, is completely remarkable. That people can continue with this work each and every day, all together as a society, is something that I think really is worth the attention from other countries that have their problems, often luxury ones compared to the Ukrainians, but still they continue each and every day with reforms from the bottom up and throughout the society. And this I know, and I work with them. I just came from Ukraine last week and go there regularly, and it is an honor to be in this position, to be a tiny piece in a big puzzle, and to see the outstanding work that they do. And in this regard, coordination is essential. Ukrainian national authorities play a leading role in shaping policy responses. Mechanisms such as the Bring It Back UA platform help ensure coherence across institutions and partners. At the international level, stronger coordination remains key. The International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children is an important platform. The priority now is to translate commitments into concrete and measurable outcomes, and I hope today, the meeting today will show that. Allow me also to emphasize the indispensable role of civil society. Civil society organizations are essential partners. They document violations, preserve evidence, support affected children and families, and maintain international attention. As this summit demonstrates, they also play a crucial role in advocacy and in advancing accountability and justice. What we are witnessing is not only a blatant attack on physical territory, but on the very heart of the nation, on its children. It is an attack on their identity, their connection to their families, their language, their culture, their present, and their future. Our response must always remain firmly anchored in the human dimension of this war of aggression. And accountability is not abstract. It is about restoring dignity, rebuilding trust, and enabling recovery. It is about ensuring that children can rebuild their lives. This is a shared responsibility, and not only for Ukraine, but for all of us. And our objective is clear, that Ukrainian children can grow up in safety, with their rights fully respected, and with the possibility to rebuild their lives in a free, resilient, and sovereign Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And I have questions for you, of course, and we also have prepared questions from the audience. I hope there will be questions in the end. We'll make room for that for sure. But I think I will pass on the word in the panel to Olha and ask you to say a little bit about the situation in Crimean. And then we'll continue, and I will open up and ask each of you questions. And you're also welcome to, of course, comment on each other's contributions. Olha, please go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today with you and participate in this very important discussion. I represent the Crimean Human Rights Group. We have been documenting crimes against humanity since 2014 in Crimea. I'm originally from Crimea, and also my team from Crimea, Crimean journalists and human rights defenders. So after 2022, we expand our work in so-called newly occupied territories. It's about Kherson, occupied parts of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, and we first of all document politically motivated persecution of civilians in occupied territories. I think it's clear to all of us that Russia shows no intention to end the war against Ukraine and its citizens. For example, according to the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, 2025 was the dateless year for the civilian population in Ukraine after 2022, because the level of casualties 70% higher than in 2023, for example. At the same time, the population of between 3 and 5 million people remains under occupation and suffer daily from massive human rights violations. And Russia imposes its citizens, denies access to essential services for civilians, implements a policy of mass nationalization of property, kidnaps, imprisons, tortures civilians who remain under occupation, including Crimea, of course. And the number of civilians deprived of their liberty because of Russian aggression continues to rise. And for example, according to the Ukraine Office of General Prosecutor, they have identified more than 15,000 civilians who have been and continue to be held in detentions since 2022, including hostages from Crimea. And our documentation, for example, confirms an increased politically motivated persecution of women in Crimea and also in other occupied territories. And just one example about Crimea. Before 2022, in list of human rights defenders, we had a maximum 5 women who were persecuted on political reasons. But now in our list of political prisoners, more than 60 women were persecuted by Russians for resisting the occupation and for expressing their Ukrainian identity in Crimea. So it's just one example in Crimea. But we see the same trend in other occupied territories to increase persecution of women. And what we see, Russia of course uses torture, but against women also Russia uses children. So many women that we work with these cases and provide legal support for women who are under Russian political motivated persecution. And unfortunately, FSB uses children like pressure on these women. For example, the threat to back children from family, and of course it's very powerful method from FSB, unfortunately. But problem is that there are still no effective mechanism for releasing return Ukrainian civilians from Russian captivity. And going changing between Russia and Ukraine almost never includes civilians, unfortunately, because Russia refuses to release Ukrainian civilians despite all the statements made during the negotiation process. And one example about this, by the end of 2025, since the start of full-scale invasion, Ukraine has returned more than 6,000 Ukrainian citizens from Russian captivity, but only 400 among them are civilian. So it's 7% of all Ukrainian civilians who were returned under this exchange process between Russia and Ukraine. So it means we still no mechanism for civilians. So and maybe after that I can share some recommendations, and now I would like to pass the word to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was very, very, I think, not very pleasant to listen to, but still, nevertheless, we need to know what's going on. I will now ask Rasmus Grue Christensen from Dignity to say a little bit about your work on human rights in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Marlene, and thank you, Olha and Thordis, for some powerful statements. So distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, when we speak about justice for Ukraine, I think it's important to say that this is not only a legal question. This is a moral question. This is a strategic question. This is a question about the kind of international order that we are willing to defend. Russia's war is not only fought with missiles and drones and tanks, it is, at least in the occupied territories, as you know, it's also fought with torture chambers, sexual violence, deportations, and the systematic destruction of human dignity aimed at breaking communities and erasing Ukrainian identity. Together with our Ukrainian partners, and supported by the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dignity has documented how torture, unlawful detention, deportation have become tools of occupation and control since the very early days of the full-scale invasion. Importantly, this work is not only about collecting testimonies, it's about building credible pathways to justice while protecting the dignity, while protecting the well-being of survivors. Our documentation is conducted, of course, in accordance with internationally recognized standards such as the Istanbul Protocol, ensuring that medical and psychological evidence can support future criminal proceedings. And accountability and rehabilitation are not treated as separate tracks. Testimonies are collected, of course, only with informed consent. Survivors are always informed of possible legal pathways and legal risks, and we provide psychological and practical support to thousands of victims and witnesses both before, during, and after interviews. This matters because justice cannot be built on extraction of evidence alone. If accountability efforts end up re-traumatizing survivors, we risk reproducing harm rather than confronting it. We have made several comprehensive reports and submissions on the systematic use of torture, sexual violence, and deportation by the Russian occupying forces against Ukrainian civilians. And in 1 or 2 weeks, Dignity and our strong Ukrainian partners will launch yet another report called Deportation to Hell. This new report is based on testimonies of hundreds of Ukrainian prisoners transferred from correctional facilities in Kherson and Mykolaiv to occupied Crimea or the Russian Federation. The testimonies describe overcrowded transport vehicles, denial of water, sanitation and medical care, systematic beatings, electroshocks, threats of sexual violence, and systematic humiliation targeting Ukrainian identity. Many detainees were denied contact with their families and pressured to accept Russian citizenship. Refusal resulted in solitary confinement and further ill treatment. Taken together, these testimonies point not to isolated abuse, but to patterns that may indeed amount to both war crimes and crimes against humanity. These new findings are consistent with other and similar analyses, including a report from last year from the UN monitoring mission, which suggests that 95% of Ukrainian prisoners of war have been exposed to torture or treatment in Russian captivity, and more than 75% of civilian detainees said the same. And this is precisely why accountability cannot be postponed until after a possible peace. Accountability is part of building peace, as you, Marlene, also said. A peace that ignores torture will not be just. A peace that treats deportation as a bargaining chip will not be durable. A peace that leaves survivors alone with their trauma will not really be peace at all. The international community has already taken important steps in Ukraine and also more steps compared with many other conflicts and settings, as I'm sure Marc will also elaborate on a little later. But there is still, nevertheless, a significant gap between documenting crimes in Ukraine and delivering consequences for perpetrators. Moral clarity matters, of course, but accountability ultimately depends on institutions, resources, and continued political will. First, European states must sustain and scale support for documentation and survivor-centered accountability efforts. Evidence disappears, witnesses are displaced, Ukrainian civil society are carrying an extraordinary burden in this respect, but they cannot carry it alone. Second, states must support all accountability tracks at once. Ukrainian national prosecutions, universal jurisdiction cases around Europe, ICC investigations, the upcoming special tribunal for the crime of aggression, reparation mechanisms, and sanctions. These are not competing paths. They are a justice ecosystem, or as you said, a justice puzzle. Third, the international community must insist that the occupied territories do not become accountability black holes. Torture, deportation, enforced disappearances in these areas must remain visible, documented, and legally pursued. Fourth, and finally, justice must be integrated into any future peace framework, not as an obstacle to negotiations, but as a condition for a peace that can hold, as Alexandra also said in her keynote speech. At Dignity, we know from decades of work with torture survivors around the world that impunity does not only deny justice. Impunity prolongs violence. It tells perpetrators that the system works in their favor. It tells victims that their suffering does not really count. Ukraine is therefore a test case far beyond Ukraine. If Europe and the wider international community cannot defend the prohibition of torture, the protection of civilians, the principle that aggression has consequences here, then those norms will be weakened even further everywhere. But the opposite, of course, is also true, as Ludmila also alluded to in the beginning. If we get this right, if we document rigorously, support survivors seriously, prosecute strategically, and also keep justice at the center of a possible peace, Ukraine can help demonstrate that accountability is indeed still possible, even in an era where international legal order is under really profound pressure. Not because justice will be quick, because it will not, but because the message will be clear. Torture is not a lawful tool of war. Deportation is not an acceptable policy option. Occupation does not erase rights. And peace, of course, without justice is not peace. It's only the preparation for the next crime. So the question facing Europe today is therefore not whether we can afford accountability for Ukraine. It is whether we can afford the global consequences of abandoning it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. I get very encouraged by listening to despite the messages that this idea of accountability as we are facing a war, continuing war, is still something that is emphasized, and we insist on that. And I think that you, Marc, Schack also say a little bit about this idea that legal issues are taken more seriously in this situation. And I'm really curious to hear you say a bit more about that. So in what way is the sport different? And are we in a situation where we, all of us who support Ukraine, actually insist on the rule of law despite the deterioration of the international rule of law? I think that is actually something we're seeing right now. and it gives a little hope, in my opinion. But Marc, would you please
Yes.
say a few words?
Yes. I don't know if I'm going to be that encouraging, but I'll try. I thought a lot about what I wanted to say today because I think a lot has been said already. This was been going on for a long time. A lot of research has been done, a lot of NGO work has been done, a lot of evidence has been produced. So I thought what I would do is to try to give a bird's eye view or outside perspective on the situation in Ukraine and the justice initiatives that have been taken. So see, I'm an international lawyer mostly, and I follow various situations, including Ukraine. And to me, at least, it seems as though we have international criminal law, international justice rolling basically everywhere, with perhaps the exception of Ukraine. So I think that's the overall situation that we're looking at. To me, at least, it seems both in academia and in Ukraine itself and globally, the justice initiatives are being taken seriously in Ukraine, but perhaps not in other places. So we're seeing kind of the conversations on international justice go two different ways. The Ukrainian version, where we have a lot of initiatives, and then basically everywhere else, Gaza or Sudan or Iran now, so on and so forth. So I think that's the overall situation. Things are going downhill, but in Ukraine and the initiatives in Ukraine are still going strong. And I think that's just something to keep in mind when we talk about what's happening justice-wise in Ukraine. So an overall issue, I think, is that the documentation of war crimes and crimes against humanity are not the problem. It seems to me there's excellent documentation and excellent initiatives to document these crimes. I think the problem is the scale of the crimes being committed and the access to perpetrators, basically, and ensuring a system that's able to deal with those two problems. And that goes to the issues, what does impunity mean? When we say we don't want impunity, what does that mean? For this talk today, I assume that the EU side on it, the EU has a side called the EU Solidarity with Ukraine, and it has a side holding Russia accountable. What it says is that the EU is strongly committed to ensuring that all international crimes committed in and against Ukraine do not go unpunished. And it knows that Ukraine is investigating more than 200,000 instances of alleged international crimes, and the number could, of course, be much higher. I think the latest number I saw was 130,000 or so incidents identified. So, to me at least, there's a disconnect here. We have so many crimes, and no system can deal with it. So I thought I'll try to give you like a historical baseline of what does impunity look like in other places. What can you expect? And the closest we get to total justice or no impunity would be Rwanda. Basically, that's a situation where the perpetrators lost, and they were available, and the new government, the victims of the crimes, was able to create an entirely new legal system, or quasi-legal system, at just courts, where it was basically an attempt to lower the bar for criminal responsibility, so you could get basically all perpetrators through that system. That ended up being a system that dealt with almost 2 million people. But that's the only example I can think of something approaching, even approaching total justice phenomenon. What we usually have, for example, after the Second World War, we had a number of trials, we had subsequent trials, and we had trials in at least the West and unified Germany. But in total, and we don't have excellent numbers, but in total we are talking about 20,000, 25,000 people who were prosecuted and punished, and most of the people who didn't get long prison sentences. It just went down and down and down because the appetite for justice went down and down and down. And I think perhaps the most equivalent situation that I could think of at least would be the Balkan Wars in the 1990s and the justice initiative there. We had the ICTY there, prosecuted, indicted 161 persons and 193. And then there were domestic justice, domestic prosecutions. Of course, we have very good numbers there, but I think 1,000-ish is a good. Maybe it's a little less, maybe it's 2,000, but thereabouts. So that's the historical. What can we expect? What do we mean when we talk about? Or we say we don't want impunity. So when I look at Ukraine, I see so many initiatives that are quite unique. There's a lot of documentation going on in the EU, in the UN system. There are so many mechanisms set up to document crimes continuously. For example, UN Human Rights Council. There are a lot of NGOs, among people in the room as well. For example, the Center for Civil Liberties that document a lot of crimes. There's the ICC, which unprecedented, but I think I wrote down 43 referrals of the situation. So we have that court into the situation very, very early on. Now we're getting the special tribunal for the crime of aggression. We have various initiatives on the Eurojust. We have the court, national crime standard state base. And of course, we have the domestic prosecution initiatives in Ukraine and also in other states. So to me, at least, it seems that we don't want impunity. We want accountability. But there is just a scale of crimes being committed and a problem of access, and identify maybe specific people, but access to the people involved. That's just going to make it difficult to get at least criminal justice. Also, want to know there's the register for damages. As far as I can tell, there's much more than 100,000 claims there as well. So we could talk about large numbers. And to me, it seems at least that an excellent documentation system has been set up. There's under the circumstances at least, the system set up domestically in Ukraine. The system being set up on aggression, the ICC, the cooperation mainly with the EU partners, but also with other partners, will produce a vast number of documented crimes that likely will, for the large part, be prosecuted. And I think that the choice that Ukraine faces and the choice that needs to be dealt with is what do we do with all this information? Do we want continuous prosecutions for a long time? Do we want to normalize relationships at some point? Do we want some kind of broader justice mechanism? Do we only want the criminal version, or do we want the financial version, or do we want the historical version of justice, or all of the above? And how to deal with that? So I think we're building up towards a significant capacity of identifying crimes and a much more capacity of dealing with those crimes. And I think that's mainly the choice that Ukraine will face, is how to deal with that situation.
Just a reflection from myself that when you fight an aggressive and brutal like Russia, it seems to me that one of the things that characterizes Ukraine and the West is this insistence on the rule of law, and this insistence that we do not accept not to take the rule of law seriously, and also to continue insisting that everything has to be documented and all the crimes committed that certainly haven't gone down but perhaps up that they are talked about as crimes, and that we insist on that and continue to insist on justice. That's also the civilization against the non-civilized. I think that's a very it's part of the whole kind of narrative that we of course want to build, and which is not just a narrative but a reality. But thank you very much, Marc. I would like to pose a few questions to each of you, but one of the things reflecting on what has been said and what you said, Thordis, first, we talk about this abduction of children to Russia. Could you say a little bit more about how many we are talking about, and how many have you actually managed to get home, and what kind of state are they in when they come back? Do you know anything about that?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, there is no concrete number, I would say, that people would be confident in saying this is the number. But the Ministry of Justice in Ukraine has now built a very good register where they have basically verified all the data and information, and they have the number 20,570. Down to names, and not the first list that was built, but a verified and a concrete one. The Yale Humanitarian Research Lab, with its technology and satellites, they estimate that they are tracking around 35,000 children in 216 locations inside Russia. But when you look at, and from today we have 2,129, at least a couple of days ago, maybe 2,130, something low, that have been returned. The vast majority of those children that have been returned is through basically NGO work, of course in cooperation with government agencies. Through mediation, maybe around 100. Qatar is the biggest one there, but mediation is not the tool that is being used. Here we have to keep in mind, and that's why I mentioned the temple-occupied territories. I mean, we have more than 1.5 million children in the temple-occupied territories. And how do we, what is their situation? We do not have access to that. Very limited access. Very few have access into those territories. What is being done with those children? I mean, I have met young boys that have just escaped and came to Kyiv, and they are Russified. They are brainwashed. They have to enter school where they are forbidden to speak Ukrainian, where their whole identity is stolen. And you could ask, well, why would they attend the school? Well, because if they don't attend the school, they will be taken away from their parents. And then they try to escape when they get old enough, just before they're sent to the front lines, to fight the same people that are sacrificing their lives to save their future. The situation of the children that are brought back is, of course, it's different between children, but they all share basically the same story, that their identity is stolen. They are forbidden to speak their mother language. They are either told that nobody in Ukraine loves them. They are told that Ukraine does not exist. And of course, we don't have to understand, but we have to know that from the Russian side, if you believe there is no such thing as a sovereign, independent Ukraine with its own identity and own history, well, then you can say it's our children anyway. That's their narrative. They have, educational gap. They're in need of healthcare support. They are in need of huge, trauma-informed care, rehabilitation, reintegration, learn how to trust again, and then, of course, other more severe, violations as well. But it is extremely important to keep in mind the children and the people in the temple-occupied territories. You cannot only talk about the children that have been unlawfully abducted and basically stolen to Russia, because it is also stolen childhood when you are, militarized, re-educated, brainwashed, and you're told that there's no such thing as Ukraine and your identity. And then, of course, we do have information about the fact that especially the younger boys are basically trained with their newest drone technology and then plan to send to the front lines. And when year passes, you have children that have been brainwashed. So you also have, young adults, young boys from Ukraine that have been brainwashed and now believe they're fighting the right war by recruiting and fighting their own motherland and their own people. That is what happens. And therefore, 4 years is a very long time in an adult's life. The 4 years for a child is a lifetime. So if we continue on this pace, if we have this over 2,000 children up to now, those children will be grown-ups. And because the Russian authorities, they are trying their best in erasing their identity. Some of the children have been adopted. So their history is just, it's gone. So we will, this is history repeating itself. And that's why I really liked your line, and I even wrote it down, because it's also a question whether we can afford the global consequences of abandoning accountability. Because what is happening there is, I would say that Ukraine is a test of everything we stand for. And it's up to us to do whatever we can to do right, for what is right and human in a civilized world.
Thank you very much. I almost came to think about another question I wanted to ask, but maybe I won't because we don't have much time. But thinking about also the security risk of having these young people back in Ukraine and then being brainwashed, and what kind of security risk that could constitute. But if we have time, I'll give you one minute in the end before we open up the floor. But Olha, I would also like you to say a little bit more about the situation. Have you any reflections from what you have heard here in the panel on the situation in Crimea? And I was thinking of is there any hope in Crimea to return to Ukraine?
Thank you. So maybe several thoughts about international response in humanitarian issue context, including civilian detainees, including folks from Crimeans and people from other occupied territory. So what is very important? For example, increasing pressure on Russia to facilitate to release civilian detainees requires that the issue of civilian detainees be made visible internationally by holding them on the agenda, mentioning their names, imposing sanctions against persons who directly involved in political motivated prosecution, people and institutions who involved in this. Also actively engaging in the international platform for the release of civilians deprived liberty during the armed conflict, because my colleagues mentioned international platform for children, but also we have international platform for civilian detainees created in 2024, and also very important to participate in international Crimean platform. So Crimean platform is very important for Crimeans because they understand that only this platform exists for Crimeans, for issue of deoccupation and reintegration people from Crimea, so it's very important. In particular, participation in the advocacy mentoring initiative brings the names of political prisoners and civilian detainees to international agenda. This initiative was launched in 2021 by Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine and supported by human rights defenders and permanent mission of Ukrainian President in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. So this initiative aimed at drawing attention to civilian detainees internationally, and so it's very important to us to see and show on international level that Ukrainian citizens are legally detained in captivity in acceptable condition and without access to basic needs on the territory of the Russian Federation and also in occupied territories. And mentors, diplomats, members of parliament, government officials, writers, journalists from 19 countries have joined this initiative. And our summit was about advocacy, so that's why it's very important to participate in this initiative. And we will also invite members of the Danish parliament, Danish journalists, Danish activists, human rights defenders, and artists to become mentors for Ukrainian political prisoners detained by Russia and to be their voices on international level. Secondly, of course, we know about some attempts to negotiate some so-called peaceful negotiation, but it still exists, so that for us it's also a possibility to talk about civilian detainees. So that's why it's very important that all participants involved in the negotiation process regarding the war in Ukraine must demand that Russia provide a complete list of civilians, Ukrainian civilians detained in the occupied territories of Ukraine, in the Russian Federation, in Belarus for political reasons, and also it's very important that Russia must provide a list of places of detention of civilian detainees, and also provide access for international organization for these places. And about people in occupied territories, also one more point that I think very important, the situation of civilians in the occupied territories of Ukraine must be taken into account in any process aimed in restoring a just and lasting peace. For example, now it's very important to speak internationally about establishing evacuation corridors between Ukraine and Russia. So it's first of all about occupied territories and Ukrainian government-controlled areas with the possibility to leave these territories with Ukrainian documents, because you know that Russia demands to give Russian passports. And it's very important that now many people from occupied territories, they don't have the possibility to leave occupied territories without Russian passport. So but we need this possibility for people. Also, very important issue is the humanitarian situation. So we need granting humanitarian access to international organizations to the occupied territories with the possibility to provide humanitarian assistance directly to Ukrainian citizens. So currently it's very important for areas, for regions under occupation who are on the brink of humanitarian disaster, like Olha, Kherson region, Mariupol, and other occupied territories. And one more issue that I would like to highlight is it's very important to providing available information and access to the occupied territories to search teams to establish the location of persons missing under the war. I think it also can be part of any negotiation with Russia. So, and finally, about accountability, and my colleagues told many very important things about it. So, ensuring just peace requires preventing any perspective of amnesty of individuals who committed or incited to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. And at the same time, it's very important to strengthen support of Ukraine's justice system and also support Ukraine's civil society organizations to document war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. Also support the establishment and join a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine and international compensation mechanism. And I think also it's important to be proactive in steps to initiate the implementation of universal jurisdiction mechanism for crimes committed in connection with Russian aggressions. So I think it's some points that we also, together with human rights defenders for Ukraine, advocate internationally.
Thank you. I think in order to make room for questions, would you mind answering in the end, then get the word back? So if anyone has anything they want to ask the panel, and then I hope that the questions will be addressed at Rasmus or Marc. Any questions at Rasmus or Marc first? Yes, please introduce yourself.
My name is Skrypnyk, of the Ukrainian Foundation Ukraine Campaigns. First of all, thank you all for working for justice in Ukraine, for your dedication and time. For years, at different conferences, we are repeating the same. how it's important to ensure justice. We all know about that, we don't have to convince each other, right? My question will be, how to ensure accountability already now in prolonged Russian war that might continue for years from now on. Time is an enemy in collecting evidence, protecting people in occupied territories and Ukrainian kids losing fully their identity. Also shifting focus from Ukrainian case and other war conflicts in the world and shifting political arena in general in the world. What concrete mechanisms and timing measures how institutions have to react in prolonged war for years, counting that political dynamic and will might change as well. And second question, how to ensure Russians being responsible in future peace processes and after the war ends for over 200,000 war crimes committed by them, since the problem isn't only Putin regime itself, but Russian colonial regime and chauvinistic imperialistic mindset of Russian people. Basically, until Russian Federation exists in same status with any other leader, we can be secured that Russian attack will not happen again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have some briefer questions, please. I think we'll take two more and then get back to the panel, and then I don't think we have more time. Anyone else?
Yes, it's me.
Please make it brief so that more people can say something.
Yeah. Julia Karmas Larsen, ABMPA consultant Denmark. Reflecting on Marc's statements, which we are very interested in, about data mismatch. How is the data organized now, shifting it from ad hoc emergency monitoring to a stable data collection? And what is that specific central authority which is accountable for the long-term data collection across national borders? We are not talking about Ukrainian efforts and initiatives. I would appreciate the answer. Thank you so much.
Last question up here.
Hello, Vitaly Zabolotsky, Ukrainian Association in Tampere, Finland. Quick question or comment. I think the biggest mistake Europe makes when talking about justice in this war of aggression, Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, is separating accountability of Russian state versus Russian people. How do we actually make it so that Russian people are accountable and Russian passport holders in Europe is something you don't touch with a 10-foot pole?
Well, yeah, good questions. I think we'll return to the panel and give Rasmus and Marc an opportunity to answer whatever you want from these questions. If I can just add to a question that can cover both of you or can involve both of you about the technology and the data with drones everywhere. To what degree does that change the possibility of actually knowing about the atrocities going on and taking them into account? In what way is this war different when it comes to technology? Maybe both of you could answer that, but Rasmus, you go first.
Thank you very much. And I think for the first question, you're quite right that time is indeed the enemy. But I think what makes, from a human rights perspective, what makes Ukraine unique is first the quality of the data, the fact that evidence is collected live while hostilities are still unfolding, and the fact that so much of the data is digital. It's quite unique that you can have AI-empowered open source intelligence collection of telegram communication and so on. So I think the documentation, the quality, the timing of the data is quite unique. I think second, the unique thing is, as Marc was also pointing out, is the relatively solid international support for a number of different accountability mechanisms and avenues. And as I mentioned, I don't consider these various mechanisms as competing paths, but as part and parcel of one big justice ecology, basically. So I think it's extremely important that the international community continues to support these various mechanisms. I think it's very important also to encourage prosecution services in a number of European countries, including this one, to actually pursue concrete cases under, for instance, the principle of universal jurisdiction. Finally, I just want to mention also, to allow my co-panelists to get the floor, mention that justice is important in itself, of course, because justice is justice, and we believe there is important preventive potentials in pursuing justice, but justice is also extremely crucial for the healing of survivors. So even if not every perpetrator on earth or every perpetrator in the Russian Federation is actually ending up behind bars, I think the importance that at least some perpetrators are held accountable is extremely important for the rehabilitation and the healing of victims' indignity. For instance, in addition to all the international work we carry out, we run one of the largest rehabilitation centers here in Denmark for traumatized refugees, including from Ukraine, and many of them stress this point that of course you can get very far with health-based rehabilitation, but the fact that at least some perpetrators are held to justice has an extremely important, is extremely important for their healing.
Thank you. Marc?
Yeah, I think my overall point was that unfortunately we are going to get imperfect justice. So the question is how to deal with that. And there are a number of ways to do that. You can focus on the highest levels. Say we are going to focus our efforts on highest levels. For example, we can say we want the worst of the worst. If you've been behind systematic torture, various crimes on that heavy, we want those people prosecuted. We can have diplomatic crimes focused on. We can have representatives of larger scale crimes. There are various versions of trying to get overall justice without getting total justice. Then on data collection, I'm not sure what's in each database, but we have various databases that are focused on different things. So the ATOs will have their own focus on identifying, for example, systematic types of crimes. We will have focus on torture, for example. Others have other focuses. We have the Coordinated Crimes Evidence Database, which is intended to collect data from various sources. The ICC will have its own database, but focused on the highest level of the Russian political class and armed forces. And of course, we have domestic databases. So we have a bunch of different databases trying to do different things. And my hope would be that we could join those at some point for historical database as well. I think you're completely right. The challenge is to systematize all the evidence we have, not to get. It's not too difficult to gather the evidence, to get relevant information out of the data we have. So I think that's the main issue. On state versus the people, focusing on individuals versus the state. I think that's the choice that needs to be made. Is the focus on individuals? Are these crimes committed by individuals or the state? And what should Europe, Ukraine, of course, and the rest of the world do about the issue of engaging with Russia when Russia is supposed to stay? So how to engage with Russia long term? That is the choice that needs to be dealt with, and I don't have to answer that.
Thank you so much. Thordis, you wanted to comment? I think we'll take a round now, one minute to each, and then we'll finish up.
Yes, thank you. Just to add a bit, because those are very good questions. I think it's some of the tools and mechanisms we know will take time, and these standards are very tough and high. We have ICC, and now we are, forming the special tribunal, which is focused on the individuals, but definitely the ones that make decisions and have taken decisions on war of aggression. Register of damage is a smaller version, but extremely important. And now we just recently opened the category with regards to the unlawfully abducted children. So not only if an apartment is attacked, but for this as well. Frozen assets is also, both to make them pay, and that is directly and then indirectly also for the people of Russia. If you use frozen Russian assets to actually pay for the damages and war crimes. And then my final point on sanctions. I mean, both the sanctions as we usually talk about them, but now also, and I'm hoping that today in Brussels there will be an additional sanctions, and that goes down to individuals with regards to the unlawfully abducted children. Because it's not only Putin, it's not only Maria Lvova-Belova, it's not only ministries, it goes down the society and even companies. And then my final point, if you truly focus on trauma-informed care and allow people to actually heal, that is also an important part. An important part of that is the accountability. So it's, of course, it is an ecosystem. And then if we can make sure that Ukraine is truly free and sovereign, as a member of the European Union, as a member of NATO, that is also I would say, a part of it, because that means that, Ukraine has won, and we have won. And so I think it's a complicated picture, but just to mention couple of things.
Thanks, Thordis. Olha, you want to say very briefly?
Yeah, very briefly about the important question about Russians, and their roles in this war. So I think it's also about accountability and why it's impossible to have amnesty for individuals who committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. Because the documentation and investigation of Russian crimes in Ukraine shows that all Russians who are directly involved in this war, they are perpetrators. So it confirms that not only Putin are responsible for this war. That's why I think accountability is also important for our international partners and also for Russians to see that they are perpetrators. And they need this tribunal for Russian aggression, for crime of Russian aggression, to have a chance to change their state, their country. I think only with this accountability process it's impossible also for Russians to have a chance to new life in their country.
Thank you, Marc. 1 minute, and Rasmus will finish off. You first.
Specific question or sorry?
No, it's not a question. It's just if you have something you want to say at the end. Comment on it.
I think, just I guess to repeat myself, there's so much information available now, and there's a system being set up to deal with both the situation as it is now, but also a hopefully war situation. And I think just at this point it's important to begin to think about what do we actually want at the end of the day. If we cannot get the perfect thing, social justice and get economic compensation and all the things that is strive for. What's the goal of all of this when we have all this material and we have all this evidence? What do we actually want? What's the most important essentially? I think that's a question that needs to be dealt with at this point. Not so much can we get more evidence, can we get more systems in place. I think the system is in place.
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you. I think if one looks at the battlefield, it's easy to get a little pessimistic. If one look at the broader political picture with continued rise of authoritarian forces around the world, it's also easy to get a little pessimistic. But one should not get overwhelmed here, because that's exactly, by the way, what Putin wants us to be, namely overwhelmed with disillusionment. What we should say is that when it comes to justice and accountability in Ukraine, we actually, despite the complexity, despite the challenges, we actually have the chance to get this one, maybe not perfect, but we have the chance to get this right. And I think that should really mobilize all of us to continue to participate in this work and to continue for politicians to invest in this important work, because this will be important for justice for Ukrainians, and it will also be important for this rather fragile international legal order that we're all part of. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. believe that we do insist on handling this whole situation in a civilized manner, and that it is explicitly going to be civilized and with justice in the end. So I just want with these words to thank you all, Olha, Marc, Thordis and Rasmus, for taking the time to open this day of discussions, and thank you to the audience also for the questions, and now we have coffee.